the main idea of the comic book is like our fight is not against the devil. It's not no, it's not against with the blood and bone, but it's against like bad thoughts or devil. So that's the main idea of the story. In the story, people find themselves fighting with evil animals, and a lot of people get to die in the story. But when they like they took their time and think about it, but the main thing that they should fix is like killing this devil, so that they have their own peace. So
I want you to know God and make God known. Welcome to another episode of the Make God Known podcast. I'm your host, Samuel Teka. Today we have a special guest, and it's going to be a special episode as well. His featured comic book, Bugnad, just released and is available now, and I will leave the link down below so that you guys could gain access to it. Overall, this dude is just such a talented guy. The first time that I met him, I just thought he was so humble, so modest, and so I can't wait to get into a conversation with him. And so without further ado, Fanuel, welcome to the podcast, sir.
thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I have to just warn the people that are watching on YouTube that my screen is right here, but my camera is right here. So if I'm looking here, it's because I'm looking at Fanuel. Okay, so just so you guys know, I have to make sure that I sometimes like give context behind the things that I do sometimes. Recently, you and your team released a comic book called Bugnad. And during our conversation about it personally, and if I could recall correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, okay? You mentioned that this story is actually based on real historical events, or is it tale that has been told in Ethiopian history? Which one is it?
I think it's both tale that has been told
Okay.
in Ethiopian history and also true events that happened.
Okay.
But mostly it's tales. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. So I would love for you to elaborate on your inspiration behind Bugnad and how you brought that story to life in comic book form. But before we get to that question, I want to let the audience know a little bit about Fanuel. Okay. I want the people to know you. I want you to tell your story. Who is Fanuel? Okay. What experiences shaped you and really you've become the person that you are today? So maybe share a little bit of your story.
Okay. So my name is Fanuel Lod. I was born in Dredor, which was vibrant city, and I came here in Addis Ababa to learn art, and I've been learning art for 4 years, and I graduated with industrial design, minor in fine arts. And when I was third year, I started to focus on computer graphics. I found computer graphics very interesting because it allows you to take extra effort or to imagine and also to see things beyond the circumstance and the challenge you have. So I found this tool very escaping for me. So whenever I start to do what I do, I feel like I'm escaping from the things that hold me back and my problems, my circumstances. So I focused on digital art and I started working on comic books. And I created my own company called Kadamawi Studio, which we focus on branding, digital marketing, and we usually do works for international movie companies like Goodbye Kansas, companies that connected with Netflix, Plan B. So these are the companies we've been working on. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's amazing. That's incredible. So tell us, like, the inspiration behind Bugnad, man. Like,
Yeah.
how did that come about,
Mm.
bringing it into comic book form?
Yeah, so It initially started on 123 of Adwan celebration before 4 years. So back then, I was thinking about creating an image that resembles the Adwan victory, and I had worked on a superhero character which looks like Captain America, but very Ethiopian. And I posted that, and people's reaction was insane. Like having this kind of superhero character that resembles Adwa is something new for the people, and that also inspired me or sparked something in my head to focus on these kind of things because a lot of kids and young people need that. For example, if you see on the in the Western culture in America, I mean, a lot of things have been visualized a lot, and like they were working for the future for the past like 16 years almost. So if you read their comics, it's like it's futuristic. A lot of concepts came up from these comic books, mnamen, and a lot of things are visualized with the Western culture. Like you can't see the black people in the future when you see sci-fi movies or stories in the Western movies. So that inspired me to have a story which includes the black people into the future or something new for the young generation. So the lack of representation inspired me to start working on this comic book. So I started researching more about our history. I started to read a lot of historical books, and I was actually reaching out to historians and old peoples to tell me stories, like tales they hear about. So I took those stories, I gathered all the stories, and I started to put the stories together and like twist it in my own way and work on the skeleton of the story. And like I've gathered my teammates and people to work on this one as well to help me. And like we started developing the story, and we get more interested in it as the day goes on. So that's how it started. So lack of presentation is the main thing that inspired me to work on this story. Yeah.
Wow. That's really awesome. Especially, I'm a huge Marvel fan. I really am. I'm massive. I think one of my favorite characters is definitely Spider-Man, but I think someone who goes neck to neck with him is Black Panther. And as a matter of fact, my wife and I, when we saw the last Black Panther, I remember getting into a conversation with her about how awesome it was to have the black representation in the Marvel universe. And she was raving about it when she was talking about it and stuff, and I really didn't see it in that way, but I think when she started talking about it, I was like, wow, like that's amazing to have that black representation. And so it's so nice because in Ethiopia, and educate me because I don't know much, but when it comes to you know comic books or characters, like what we find in your first release of the comic book, has there ever been anything like this in times past? Have you ever seen anything like this?
I actually haven't seen like similar story like this, or this one is like very ancient story, not futuristic, but there are a lot of futuristic elements, and the world that we created is not something that have been before. But like this is new, I would say. There is a comic book called Jumper at Uncomics. Yeah, so their story is more futuristic. They have superheroes like the Flash, or like that has electric power, like different powers like Marvel characters. But this one is very ancient and very relatable with the people because For example, I mean, you might have heard of Ayajubu when you are not like behaving good, your mother or your father says Ayajubu is going to come at you. Go home or sleep. Do
I actually
something.
have
Do this.
never heard of that. That's my first
Yeah.
time.
So I think it's every people childhood memory, and like we grow up listening to, like there are a lot of white people around the neighbor.
Mm,
A lot of like magic thing happen
yeah,
here.
yeah.
So
And
we took that.
unquiet in English
Yeah,
means witch, right?
rich, yes.
Okay. Okay.
So these are like very relatable and familiar with the people. So we took this as a superhero, as a villain as well in the story.
Mm,
So I think it's a new approach. I would express it as this one is like a Game of Thrones like story, but based on
mm,
like Ethiopian theme or African theme. Like it's very
yeah.
Ethiopian. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, when I read it, I got that vibe. Like
Mm,
I never saw Game of Thrones myself, but I
mm,
definitely seen like snippets of it from,
mm,
social media and stuff like that. And
mm.
I definitely got that when I was reading this. I was like, this
That's
is
cool.
like Game of Thrones type of,
Yeah.
thing that we see here. And it's really, really cool. So clearly there's like a spiritual element to this as well, like to this comic book. And when it comes to that spiritual side, my podcast is a faith-based podcast. For you, how how does this connect to a spiritual side for you on a personal level for you?
Mm. I think this one like really connects with more like on the spiritual side. I would say. I think
Mm,
social justice is like the main thing that a Christian should focus. I would say like
yeah.
being a Christian and you do like being a Christian and sitting like on the corner and worshiping God is not like the only thing that we should do. We should stand for the people that are hurt, the people who doesn't have anything, who can't help themselves. So I mean, like if you read what Jesus does as well, he was standing for the people who have like been pushed, who have been sick, and like a lot of things. So I think it reminds us that to stand for justice, for social justice, and like the main thing in the story. Once we're done with the full comic book, I think everyone gets to understand that. It's like the main idea of the comic book is like our fight is not against the devil. It's not no. It's not against with the blood and bone, but it's against like bad thoughts or devil. So that's the main idea of the story. In the story, people find themselves fighting with evil animals, and a lot of people get to die in the story. But when they took their time and think about it, but the main thing they should fix is like killing this devil so that they have their own peace. So that's the main thing. And like right now, if you see in the world, like the bad things is the bad ideas, the bad thoughts are coming up. Like especially uh, like on the media, you hear a lot of stuffs coming. Those are the things that we should fight, not against blood and flesh.
Wow, man. I I have to tell you, one of the aspects that I really admire about you is how you connect the gift of art
Hmm.
to faith.
Hmm.
And I love that because this is not sometimes your modern way of showing faith. But
Hmm. Yes.
I think if Jesus were in our day, in our culture, just like he told stories and parables back
Hmm.
when he was physically here on earth, I believe he would be making movies. I believe he would be creating
mm,
art and telling stories like you tell stories
mm,
to get across a deeper spiritual truth. And
mm,
that's what I see you doing here. You represent Jesus so well by
mm,
using something that's so creative, so artistic.
mm,
And
mm,
by the way,
mm,
the excellence of this
mm,
is incredible.
mm,
Like when I was reading it, I was looking at the art, the detail. I was like, "Oh
mm,
my gosh, this is absolutely incredible." And if a kid
mm,
were to pick this up, he would 100% be so interested
mm,
to know more and read more and so
mm,
on and so forth. So I just say all that to say, like, you are
mm.
100% gifted, and I'm so glad that
Thank you
you
so
came
much.
out with this, man. Seriously, I
Thank you so
when
much.
I went out to your event, the one you invited
Mm,
me to, Afro
mm,
Mask,
mm, mm,
I was just shocked. I was shocked by the level of artistry that I saw there.
mm.
And I was just like, wow, man, like God is really using this guy a
Thank
lot
you so
just
much.
by bringing so many people and
Mm,
communicating deeper spiritual
mm,
truths and stuff like that. So, anyways, for those that are
yeah.
watching and listening, you guys got to check out his IG and all the stuff he's putting out. It's really incredible. So, I want to ask you this question because you talked about how this story is not against fighting flesh and blood, but against spiritual powers and principalities, which is Ephesians 6 is what you're quoting there. And I find that this generation right now, people who are our age, and even also those that are younger, are battling a lot of, spiritual principalities and a lot of lies and a lot of things that are out there. And I find that a lot of young people are pushed down and they're not encouraged to explore their creative side, or to go into something that they really love to do. I always say it for Habeshas, in my experience, has always been three things: either doctor, engineer, or lawyer. And it's just those three things. And I feel like sometimes kids get closed into this box. And so my question to you is, what if you were to give advice to a young individual who's scared, who is battling through so many maybe lies that culture tells him, so many people from the outside world convincing of to chase his dreams, what advice would you give to that individual, to that young person, you know?
Mm. That's interesting question. At the same time, very hard.
Mm,
Uh, I think we have to look beyond our problems. I would say because like the media is projecting a lot of bad stuff, bad news, everything that is happening on Earth. Like violence is happening every day. Like every negative stories you hear on the internet, negative ideologies happening. So that is covering our mind layer by layer. I think in order to imagine freely for the young people, they have to peel off these layers one by one and try to imagine like beyond this. So I'm, for example, I usually say that like I wouldn't worry. Like people always die or a lot of bad things happen on Earth, but I'm like more worried about asteroid hitting Earth or like a lot of huge like things happening outside of our Earth. So that's how I keep my mind like try to imagine or to escape from this reality happening right now. So I think you have to escape this reality in order for you to have like clear visualization of the future, about yourself, like about the people around you, about your country, about Earth as well. So I think that's very necessary for people so that they can create self agency for themselves, and so that they can be in charge of their life as well. So I think we have to, yeah, we have to teach our minds to visualize beyond our circumstance and challenges.
That's really good. And
Hmm.
to follow up with what you just said, how did you personally do that for you?
Hmm.
Like, was it through your art and what you
Hmm.
mentioned? Was it
Hmm.
through other means, or what? How was that? How were you able to do that?
Hmm. I think one thing I understood, I would say, for example, racism is common in every parts of the world,
Mm,
and
mm,
always mentioning like how to fix racism, how to get rid of racism, does not help you to get rid of racism. Rather than it just promotes it because you're always using this word while trying to figure out a way to get rid of it.
mm,
So I try to avoid it. For example, when you talk about it frequently, it becomes like a bigger problem for you. So when you ignore it, it wouldn't be that a big problem for us. So I
wow.
usually try to ignore uh, whatever like mandatory thing happening surrounding me and try to think of other things. Like I said, I like astronomy. If you see in my
Mm,
artwork, I use a lot of planets. I really get interested. Like every time I
yeah.
hear, like if I'm worried, I open like there is this show on YouTube called What If, and
Mm,
they talk a lot about planets, what's happening like outside of Earth. That's
that's
for
right.
me like escaping mechanism for me. So
Wow.
I think like there are a lot of problems. If you stick to those problems and always talk about that, it will be a lot bigger problem for us. So I
Wow.
would like
Wow.
to ignore that and think of like new things. I think
Yeah.
that's how I try to escape from it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. You know what I get from what you just said. It's amazing because you bring up social issues like, racism, for example, right? Which is, again, a a spiritual thing behind it, right? And the way I see this in my mind is you're a man of action. That's what I see. Even though there's racism happening, and you choose not to magnify the problem, but you put action to address the problem through your art. And I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's what I see through you, man. It's like you don't you're you, when you say ignore, what you're really saying is, I'm going to choose not to magnify the problem, and what I'm going to choose to do is going to step out of that problem and see it from an objective point of view and address it through the gift that God has given you.
Yeah, it's more like shifting the mind of the people from this
Mm,
to this one. Uh,
wow.
yeah, that's how I describe it. But you said it well, actually.
I love that, man. That's really, really
Mm.
cool. So hey, listen, we're at 36 minutes already, and I have so much to share, or well, I have so much to ask you.
Mhm.
But I have a Patreon, so I'm going to ask you these three questions.
Mm.
And if people want to hear your answer to these questions, they could go to my Patreon and they could go check it out. Fanuel, thank you for coming on to the Make God Known podcast. I really appreciate you. I'm a huge fan of your work since the
Thanks so
moment
much.
that I met you, and I am cheering you on, man. And I really believe that you will reach your goal of making a
Thanks so
movie.
much.
You really will. It will happen, and God will do that. So,
Thanks so
um,
much.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. I want to thank all our podcast listeners and those that are tuning in. Again, if you want the exclusive content, you can find that on Patreon. If this gave you any value, I encourage you to like, comment, and also share the video. I also want you guys to follow the podcast, whether it's on YouTube or on Apple or Spotify podcasts. You guys could follow me on Make God Known podcast. And lastly, I want each and every single one of you guys to know God and to make God known. Thank you guys. Ciao. Hey, Samuel Tuckett here again. I don't mean to bother you, but I just wanted to quickly remind you, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, what are you doing? Subscribe right now. And listen, if you're already subscribed and you want to be notified on when the videos come out, click the bell button on the top right-hand corner of the YouTube page. And listen, I'm also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So if you want to go check that out, check out the description down below. All right, guys, have a good day.